The convicted killer Levi Bellfield is told he will never be released from prison after he's given a second life sentence for the murder of the schoolgirl Millie Dowler. But this morning the jury was discharged before they reached a verdict on a final charge against Bellfield following complaints about adverse publicity. Meanwhile, Millie's sister complains about the way her parents were treated during the trial, saying it was worse than the days after she disappeared 9 years ago.
You just can't explain how horrific it is in that courtroom until you are actually in there.
Warnings that older people taking a combination of commonly used drugs may be at increased risk of dementia and death. The Olympic rush hour. Thousands snap up the latest batch of 2012 tickets within hours of them going on sale.
And coming up in sport, there are 3 Brits in action at Wimbledon today, including Andy Murray later on centre court. The 4th seed plays Ivan Ljubicic of Croatia for a place in the 4th round.
Good afternoon and welcome to the BBC News at 1. The convicted killer, Levi Bellfield, has been given a second life sentence for murdering the schoolgirl Millie Dowler 9 years ago and told he will never be released. This morning, the judge discharged the jury at the Old Bailey before they'd reached a verdict on a final charge against him because of what he called adverse publicity. Meanwhile, Millie Dowler's sister has complained about the ordeal her parents went through during the trial. From the Old Bailey, Sophie Hutchinson reports.
Dowler amusing her family as she did the ironing. This is amongst their last happy memories of her. Her sister Gemma, seen hugging her here, has spoken out about...
And apologies for that, we do seem to have lost the sound on Sophie Hutchinson's report, but we can join her now live at the Old Bailey. Sophie, it has been a very dramatic morning. Talk us through what has been happening there.
Well, these are certainly very unusual circumstances. What happened this morning was that the judge decided to discharge the jury. It means the case against Levi Bellfield is now over. Of course, yesterday he was found guilty of the abduction and murder of Millie Dowler. But today the jury's work was not over. They were meant to be considering whether he had attempted to abduct another schoolgirl the day before he murdered Millie. Her name is Rachel Cowles and she came here to the Old Bailey to give evidence about that. But the defence today, Levi Bellfield's defence, said that there had been overnight an avalanche of adverse publicity about the case in the media, and he complained that it was unfair, he said in particular, to interviews done with Levi Bellfield's former girlfriends Emma Mills and Joanna Collins. And the judge in court said that he had been forced to dismiss the jury as a result of that. He described it as deplorable, and he said the reason was that the trigger had been pulled too soon by the media, as he put it.
And we have also heard, we just heard in the headlines there from Millie Dowler's sister Gemma, who has been talking about the ordeal that her parents went through during the 2 days that they were in the stands in court.
I mean, there's no question about how painful this would have been in any situation for a family who's lost a child in this way. But it's clear from the Dowler family that what they have been through in court during this process has been extremely painful. And what Millie's sister Gemma has said is that it has almost been as painful as the day they realised that Millie had disappeared and been murdered. She said her parents had been put, almost many had said, on trial here in this court, instead of Levi Bellfield, who was in fact the person on trial here. And some of the questions that they were asked over the course of this trial were particularly painful and personal, and some believe very humiliating for them.
Well, Sophie, thank you very much, and we can now go straight to your report.
Millie Dowler amusing her family as she did the ironing. This is amongst their last happy memories of her. Her sister Gemma, seen hugging her here, has spoken out about the pain the family has been through since her murder and the way they were treated in court.
The first 2 days when my mum and dad were questioned by the defence and the prosecution was probably worse than the day that she went missing. It was that extreme.
Bob Dowler, Millie's father, was grilled about his daughter finding pornographic magazines in the house. It was suggested she'd run away because she was so upset. And Millie's mother, Sally, who said she'd had a nervous breakdown, cried as she was probed about why her daughter believed she wasn't the favourite. She collapsed as she left the witness box. Yesterday, Levi Bellfield, a multiple killer described as devious and dangerous, was convicted of Millie's abduction and murder. He was also charged with attempting to abduct Rachel Cowles, another schoolgirl, on the day before Millie's murder. But today, following what the defence described as an avalanche of adverse publicity, the judge dismissed the jury and closed the case. In court, the judge, Mr Justice Wilkie, described the publicity in relation to Bellfield as deplorable and said he'd been forced to discharge the jury as a result, as he put it, of the trigger being pulled too soon. Sentencing Bellfield, the judge said he was a cruel and pitiless killer. He gave him a whole life term. Millie's family cried and hugged each other after leaving the court.
Sophie Hutchinson with that report. The debt crisis in the Eurozone is the biggest single threat to financial stability in the UK. That's according to the Governor of the Bank of England. The bank's new financial watchdog says the impact of the crisis in Greece and other Eurozone countries could have a knock-on effect here. The warning comes as EU leaders meeting in Brussels have agreed a second massive rescue package for Greece if it adopts austerity measures. Our Europe correspondent Matthew Price is in Brussels now. Matthew.
Yes, confirmation, if we needed it, that this isn't just a crisis about a southeastern state in Europe. It is a crisis for the whole of Europe and also for Britain. Mervyn King today said that the Greece situation was a mess. He called it a debt crisis, and he said that pumping money towards Greece will only push the problem further down the road. David Cameron, a few short minutes ago here in Brussels, reiterated similar thoughts, and he says he wants Britain's banks to continue building up their balance sheets, to get more capital on their balance sheets in order to deal with any potential Greek crisis. Europe's leaders told Greece to get its act together, to push through massive reforms to save money and the euro. The German Chancellor said they've made progress.
We've achieved an important agreement on the stability of the euro. We'll do everything needed to stabilise the currency. But Greece has to agree to a new programme of cuts next week.
And that's the problem. In Greece, headlines scream out against the tax increases that programme of cuts would introduce. There's real anger against the privatisation programme too, that's designed to help pay off Greek debt. The MPs are traitors, this man said. They're selling off our country. They should be shot. On the Frankfurt trading floor, it looks calm, but there is nervousness. Athens votes on the reforms next week.
It's most important to see whether the Greek parliament is able to vote for new austerity measures to get new money. If not, the doors of the hell will be opened wide.
They won't put it like that here in Brussels, but there is genuine concern about whether Greece can pass the necessary reform programme. Now, if it does, Europe's leaders have promised to hand over both short-term funding and a second multi-billion euro bailout package. If it doesn't, there could be economic crisis across Europe. Britain's very much been on the sidelines here. David Cameron has stressed this is a euro issue.
In the case of Britain, I sought assurances that Britain wouldn't be pulled into a Eurozone package for Greece, and I've received those assurances.
The UK, though, will still help Greece because of its IMF commitments. As the leaders voiced calming words of success, one thing became clear. Brussels can't force Greece to take Europe's medicine. Everything now depends on Athens. So no guarantee that that crucial vote will go through in Athens on Tuesday. Until then, Europe's leaders are going to be holding their breath.
Matthew, thank you very much. Well, as we've been hearing, the Eurozone's debt crisis does pose the biggest threat to Britain's financial stability. That's according to the Governor of the Bank of England, Sir Mervyn King. Our chief economics correspondent, Hugh Pym, is here. So confirmation then that really this is very serious for us, not just for the Eurozone.
Yes, Sophie. So Mervyn, the Governor, was speaking at the launch of a new watchdog arm of the Bank of England, the Financial Policy Committee, which is there, to quote from his speech, as a guardian of the resilience of the UK financial system. And they published a stability report which was put out this morning. And the very first thing that he highlighted in terms of risks was what's going on in the Eurozone and in Greece. And this is what Sir Mervyn had to say about it earlier.
The most serious and immediate risk to the UK financial system stems from the worsening sovereign debt crisis in several euro area countries. As the report makes clear, direct UK bank exposures to those economies are limited. But experience has shown that contagion can spread through financial markets, especially when there is uncertainty about the precise location of exposures. A UK bank could have lent to a bank that itself had lent to a bank that in turn was exposed to sovereign risk.
So it's actually a domino effect that is the real concern here.
Yes, that's what the Governor is really pointing to, this idea of contagion, that on paper the UK hasn't got a very big exposure, but French and German banks have a lot more lending to Greece, and if they start wobbling because of what's happening over there, it will come back to us at some stage. He's not saying it will happen, he's just highlighting it as a risk. Now, he was asked, is this going to be possibly like another Lehman's, when confidence was shattered when Lehman's went down? He said they weren't comparable, but he did say the only thing that they have in common is that, quotes, it's a mess, i.e. Greece, so showing that there is concern there. He was also asked about a long-term solution to the Greek problem, and he said lending more is never an answer to a problem. He said it can buy time, but that is only useful if that time can be used to put in place a more